structural reforms that we're talking about. And the first of the series of conversations is today, where we start with administrative reforms. We have Guru, who's from the private sector, the Big Four as it's called, Ernst and Young. So he will be speaking about something very important, that is establishing very good data collection at the state level. We call it the State Statistics Commissions. He's going to speak about how do we get people into short-term contractual roles in government, and something that all of us struggle with when we look at our cities, when we look at local governance, we find that something is broken. We have distilled it down to one key problem there, that the local governments don't have a revenue raising capacity. So he's going to also tell us how that could be done. So Guru, over to you.
Thank you, Shobit, and my respects to the dignitaries on the dais, and of course everybody who's present here, eagerly waiting to hear what the private sector is supposed to say, right? So it's always a tough task to sit behind, in between two professors and a doctor. I carry none of those prefixes, right? So I have a very simple view to the whole policy frameworks that we're going to discuss. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Balu. You know, students, those who graduate from high school this year, will retire in 2070, right? Am I audible? Yeah. So I'm saying, students, those who graduate from high school this year, will retire in 2070. So we're contemplating here to put a policy framework that not only surpasses 2047, which is Viksit Bharat, but something that probably caters to people, those who are still in service those who will be in service in 2070, which effectively means that a lot of policy frameworks that we discuss will have to be a lot more flexible and subject to renewal, refurbishment, reevaluation from time to time, which I think is something that we see rarely happen, although we do see that more frequently now. I think, Dr. Balu spoke about 1947 and the transitions that happened from imperial civil services to Indian civil services and then the administration and so on and so forth. There is an act that is on the statute today as we speak, which was enacted in 1836 or 39, which was only used once in 1856, and that's called Bengal Indigo Plantation Act. It still is on the books today, right? No one has ever used, we no longer plant any indigo plantations anymore. I think that's the dichotomy that we often find ourselves with, right? And therefore, the question really is that how do we create that policy framework, which is what we often focus on when we work with governments, that not only addresses the problem of the day, but also has enough flexibility that's built in for us to be able to review this from time to time and make it very relevant. We have seen a number of acts of that nature, that vintage, being either abrogated or abolished or renewed in the last 10 to 15 year time frame. But I think that's something that needs to happen much more intently. There's an economist called Walter Williams. He actually said, I learned that you have to learn to evaluate the effectiveness of a policy than the intent. And remember, whichever administration, whichever government comes up with policies, the intent is always good. The breach in its implementation, right? And that is the reason today when we actually go back to, and I think it's a very good piece of work that's put together by the Rishi University, and I recommend each one of you. Of course, I've read the unedited version. I don't know if the edited version carries all of them, but it's a significant piece of work that covers very comprehensively. And one of the aspects that it covers, when you actually go through each of these areas, you realize that we have sufficient frameworks, right? I'm going to touch upon urban local bodies. Remember, it's an amendment that happened, 73rd and 74th Amendment in 2013. So frameworks were available for all of this time for us, right? There were a number of commissions that were constituted to look into aspects that we've discussed so far. So I think what I will do is that spend a little more time in terms of the whole framework and give you couple of experiences that we've had working with the government in the policy space, and perhaps explain where my optimism comes in. Right. So I'm an incorrigible optimist. I've been with the firm with EY now for 26 years. Of that, I worked about 18 years closely with governments. I'm not a government servant, but I worked with most of the government servants across. And I think because we work in system space, which is, by the way, it's considered as a punishment posting in government. So these were truly people who wanted to do something. So they were not respondents to punishment posting, but they genuinely wanted to contribute, and therefore had the opportunity of working with every service, some of the most committed officers in terms of changes that we brought in. One of the challenges that we often seen in a system like ours, and in a country as vast as India, with the states and local bodies and so on and so forth. In systems thinking, there is a concept called the illusion of sufficiency, right? So because what happens is that typically when you actually engage any government officer, government servant in a conversation, and you tell them the possibilities, they often will give you a response saying this is available, that's available, this is in place, that's in place. We have all the frameworks in place. And the moment you come to the aspect of implementation is when things really start slowing down. But what happens is that illusion creates that comfort for us, thinking that we figured everything out, which we haven't really. And I'll give you an example moving to urban local bodies. I think probably 20 years ago, the institutions like USAID, DFID, and many multilateral institutions poured in money to do something called urban reforms. There were programs like FIRE and GUIDE, which is institutional reforms, as well as the urban local body reforms. Today, if I were to look at the needs of these urban local bodies, they aren't very different from the challenges that we've had 20 years ago, and what perhaps has been documented. And we said in those days, the political interference and the political economy that runs at a local level is the principal hurdle for any reform, and I think that stays true even today. But having said that, we actually took some of these ideas and went abroad and to countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, Nairobi and Addis Ababa are the two urban local bodies, or the municipalities that we actually worked with. And we simply told them three things that needs to be done. One, let's look at the property taxes that you collect. Right. Second, look at all unutilized space that can be potentially used commercially. That's the second recommendation that we've made. And third, we said, create a consumption-based economy, which means that even if you want to give someone water free, do not give them free, right? Reimburse them for the charges that they pay. I think that the reason is very simple. When we begin to pay from our pocket, we realize the importance of the service that we receive. Today, we have freebies all over the place. We have bus rides free. Everything comes along with that is free. Now, I'm no one here to preach whether the government or the politicians should take the call or not. That's a separate domain. My only point is, when somebody is riding a bus, make them realize they're riding a bus and how much does it cost. 20 years ago, we made the same recommendation to Indian Railways, because there is something called universal fund, which basically all the expenses that are incurred on account of giving subsidies would go and sit in. We said no. People have to realize, and if it means that today we have the mechanism, that we have Aadhaar, the entire Jan-Dhan and the bank accounts that with that, when they spend the money, reimburse, and therefore they realize what the value of it is. So these are the three, I think, principal recommendations that I can think about from an urban local body standpoint, which are as practical for us to implement in any city in India as they are in the cities that I spoke about. And again, I'm not talking about New York, I'm not talking about London, I'm not talking about Singapore. I'm talking about fairly cities that are probably tier 2, tier 3 cities of India that you can compare, not even Bombay and Delhi, right? The second aspect is that we wanted to look at the state statistics commissions, and I don't think I need to stand here in 2025 and explain to you the importance of having data that is actionable, right? In the British administration, of course, for a different reason, I think the two most coveted positions that they've had is the chief statistician, and second one is cartographer, right? I mean, they went around the world invading every country just because they had the maps in their hand. right? And they had statisticians. Of course, they used all of that to suppress the population that they were sort of ruling. But the reality is that these were the premier services in a way. I've had the opportunity of working with the Registrar General of India, the Office of Registrar General of India, a few years ago, and we realized that was a time when we had a very dynamic Registrar General in chair, and we realized the amount of data that they sit on and how useful that can be, not just from the government point of view, but even for the commercial businesses. I mean, if you talk to a retail chain in India, like the Unilevers and others, the biggest challenge that they will have is that they do not have sufficient data for them to be able to, create programs, create packages that they can go back to and deal with this population, much more meaningfully than just having some newspaper advertisement and simply saying we give discounts here, discount there. We have no idea of what the efficacy of it is. And incidentally, as I was driving to IHC, I was browsing through some of the data that I realized that I received from one of the websites. So this is the website that basically captures geopolitical data. They actually created a map, and based on the role of people, the job description of people, how probable that they will either vote for a Democrat or a Republican. I mean, probably it's on your Insta. If you haven't already checked, you will get that get that soon. And you realize from the UX designer who's very prone to voting for a Democrat, right, to a hardware dealer or a worker who's basically in the construction business, who's very likely to vote for a Republican. Right now, that's a spectrum. Of course, in India, we use many other proxies to be able to determine. We say religion, caste, this, that, locality, so on and so forth. But nothing is scientific. So there is no reason for us now to not focus on creating these ecosystems. I think the key there really is that I think a lot of governments, both at the state and the central level, have the data. The question is that how independent those agencies are who are collecting the data. I think that is very vital. I don't think we should play around with the data, the source of the data. Once if that comes in, how you want to massage, what you want to get out of that data is really up to you. And I think today we're making progress, but I think we still have to get to some more efficient space in as far as data is concerned, both from a timing as well as the accuracy of the data that we collect. The third topic that I wanted to touch upon is about the short-term engagement of either you call contracts. By the way, contractor is a very bad word in government, right? So I think the translation is take there. So we wouldn't want to use that. And long ago I was at NADT, the the Direct Taxes, National Academy of Direct Taxes, teaching a lot of commissioners about business process re-engineering. And we spoke about customer experience. And one of the officers, of course, after the session, we were on the evening walk. So he came up to me and one of the joint commissioners of income tax. He said, what is this customer you kept talking about through the day? Khas se marne wala hota hai wo customer, as far as income tax is concerned, right? Of course, now we've come a long way from there. And those were the days when we were working with the department in terms of modernizing. And today, you see the fruits of where they are. I think the reality is that government has actually solved this problem partially, in my view. And that, I think, is through the appointment of consultants on various programs, right? So without having to really inherit a lot of these short-term contractors on their roles, today they engage a number of consultants across the board. And I'm sure a lot of you who are now being trained at Rishi Hood are going to be some of those officers. So I think I always held this view that it may be very difficult for us to change the way in which the bureaucracy is structured today. Because remember, you're now going to someone telling them that, listen, you have to write your own death knell. It's difficult. I mean, we can't write our own obituary, right? It's very difficult. We want someone else to do that a little more creatively than us. So it's a long drawn process for us if we have to do that. So the alternate way of doing it is both the academia that we have as well as the consulting fraternity that's now coming together, which is where the government is a lot more receptive for this kind of talent, and to make use of their services, not just 3 months or 6 months. Some of the programs we've been around for 8 to 9 years on some of these projects, right? So we are probably the continuity factor more than the officer who came and sat there. So it's not an exclusive story only for us. I think we have today thousands of us who are available, who are doing this good work in a consultancy way and through the consultancy part, right? So I think that's a very viable window that's available for us in the short term, if the governments find it very difficult to get the short terms. And I think, as ma'am spoke about, some of this has been misused in the past, right? So every time when there is a political dispensation comes in, then they come up with their own bag and baggage, and they would want to employ all of them either gainfully or ungainfully. But at the end of the day, we still have to cut the check to pay their salaries, right? So we may therefore have an elegant way of solving this problem, which is, as I said, governments have used that very effectively. We've in fact had number of instances where the chief ministers called us to set up a policy advocacy unit as part of their office, right? Maybe 10 people, 15 people, and they are the ones who look at every policy that the state government is either implementing or wanting to review, and perhaps sooner and later to look at how do we measure the effectiveness of this. And you'd be surprised to know which are these states. Now, these are not the most progressive states who have done this work, and you wouldn't imagine the states who have actually carried out this work. So a lot is happening. I think the question really is that how do we forge the academia, the consulting world, where you have availability of a lot more dynamic skill sets. I mean, this year, for example, in EY, we have said, everybody has to be AI trained. And if they do not have a certification, they probably won't be considered for a promotion, right? So it's no longer nice to have, I mean, you're talking about 47,000 people, not just one or two, right? So sometimes we do have to make those affirmative actions. And I'm sure government is also thinking about making those affirmative actions to enable people to change and adapt to the skill sets of the future that is required for us, right? So with that, I will end my talk. Again, as I said, very optimistic, on a very optimistic note, and I do see people sitting in this room playing those roles very effectively, even if you are not part of the government and you do not have those three-letter acronyms after your name, right? Thank you all.
Thank you, Guru.